Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. This is a new format I'm working on that will help me to focus more on each individual topic. For background footage, I'll be playing Spyro, and let me know any changes you would like to see about the format or other preferred background games. With that being said, this is a mini Iceberg, with 3 topics at each level, and 4 total levels. This video will be mainly focusing on urban myths and legends, so let's get straight into it. Level 1. Common Knowledge. Now these topics are going to be well known. However, I'll do my best to include information you may not have heard before. 27 Club. The 27 Club refers to the cultural phenomenon of artists, musicians, and celebrities dying at age 27. The first string of deaths occurred during 1969 to 1971, where Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison all died at age 27. The rise of media helped to spread this myth, with Kurt Cobain's mother saying in an interview with the Daily World, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club." A study published in the British Medical Journal in 2011 showed that there was no spike of death rates at 27. However, there are several smaller spikes around the ages 25, 32, and the average age of death in musicians being 56. Musicians specifically have a lower life expectancy than the general public, losing as much as 11 years. Some possible causes for this are the lifestyle that these artists lead, with drug use being prevalent amongst them. These often lead to either directly related or indirectly related deaths. One interesting theory as to why these artists are not stopped from these harmful practices is because artists are worth more dead than alive. Another YouTuber, Barely Sociable, dives deep into a similar topic, and I will link the video in the description. Mental health problems also contribute to this, with many members struggling with depression, anxiety, and other issues. One last conspiracy about this club is that the members have sold their soul for fame, with a legend surrounding Robert Johnson stating that he couldn't play guitar at all, so he made a deal with the devil to become the father of rock and roll. Jimi Hendrix is another story of an alleged pact with the devil. Walt Disney is cryogenically frozen. This theory states that Walt Disney has been frozen away until medical technology was advanced enough to cure his lung cancer and revive him. Several locations for where he is currently exist, but the main theory states that he is located underneath the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. The possible reasons for this theory going around are Walt Disney's fascination with technology and the future, the privacy he had in his personal life, and articles and reporters from some tabloid papers. Epcot, or Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, was Walt Disney exploring his vision of a futuristic society, showcasing the latest in technology and innovation. While initially meant to be an actual community, it instead shifted into a theme park with the same themes after Walt's death. With Walt's interest in future technology, it's not impossible for him to know about cryogenic freezing, and there also existed a heavily debated book that included such topics, The Prospect of Immortality. The first successful cryogenic freezing was done in January 1967, with Walt's death being in December 1966, so he missed the window for freezing by only a month. His privacy also did not dissuade people from this myth, with his death being very behind closed doors initially. His body was cremated 2 days after death, and his family held a private funeral. Legal documents also show that he was cremated. The tabloid media of the time also helped to perpetuate this theory. One reporter claimed he snuck into the hospital where Walt Disney was hospitalized, and upon walking into his room, he found a metal container with a recently deceased Walt suspended within. A different paper had claimed that Disney had wrote instructions to have his body frozen after death. More recent developments to this theory are around the aptly named movie Frozen. Some conspiracies speculate that this movie was named and produced to draw attention away from this myth, with search engines showing result for the movie instead of the myth. While there is not a lot of evidence to support the claim, the myth has endured in popularity. Barney the dinosaur went to prison. If you grew up around the 2000s, you may have heard or sang some crude songs related to removing Barney the dinosaur from this world. One of the rumors related to Barney, however, was that he went to prison for either drugs or assault. The first actor to play Barney is named David Joyner, and has no criminal record as far as I was able to find. His new job is rather interesting, being a tantric massage guru who helps women overcome trauma by energy work. This includes him getting intimate with some of them as well. The rest of the actors also do not have a criminal record. However, the family of the creator of the show has some interesting history. Before we get into that, let's learn a bit of the history of the show. Cheryl Leach, the creator of Barney, created the show after she could not find anything suitable for her child Patrick. She chose dinosaurs because her son loved them. However, as Patrick grew up, his mom focused on the show full-time, which left Patrick with his father. Cheryl left Barney in 1998, divorced her husband in 2001, and the husband later died by suicide in 2004. In 2013, Patrick Leach was arrested for shooting and wounding his neighbor for trespassing. Patrick was charged in 2015 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, his sentence was commuted. He was released in 2020 and supposedly still lives in the same house where the incident happened. If you would like to learn more about the background of the show, there's a documentary released by Peacock named I Love You, You Hate Me. Level 2. Atlantis. Atlantis was, according to legend, a mythical city that was eventually brought under the sea, never to be found again. Many myths center around the idea of lost cities or landmarks, like the City of Gold, the Fountain of Youth, and desert cities in Dubai. While academic consensus is that the city did not exist, that does not seem to take away from the myth. Atlantis was first mentioned by Plato in his Timaeus dialogue. He describes the island as a powerful kingdom beyond the Pillar of Heracles. The island was extremely wealthy, advanced, and protected by Poseidon. It soon conquered Africa up to Egypt, and Europe up to Etruscan Italy, before being driven back by Athens. But the morals of Atlantis became poisoned. They were eventually divinely punished with earthquakes and floods, and the island sank. Plato states the story was told to him by his grandfather, who'd learned it from an Egyptian priest, whom stated it happened 9,000 years prior. Plato had used this story in a discussion about his ideal society, and it was believed to be a parable, even at the time of telling it. A follower of Plato is said to have believed the story, but Aristotle had made a joke about Plato being able to create nations and destroy them in the same story. This legend was eventually ignored, with discussion on the topic being minimal until 1627, where Francis Bacon brought the topic back up in a novel titled The New Atlantis. The book had depicted a similar society, being politically and scientifically advanced but disappearing. In 1882, a U.S. Congressman, Ignatius Donnelly, had published his own book, titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, where he talked of an advanced civilization who had populated Europe, America, and Africa, and inspired mythology worldwide. Donnelly's book was popularized and contributed to the New Age beliefs held of the city. These two authors had reignited the interest in locating the island, and since then many theories have came out, regardless of the myth being true or false. My personal favorite theory for the location of Atlantis is the Eye of the Sahara, which is a circular structure with concentric rings, similar to that described by Plato. Some people say that they have done the math and say that it mostly checks out, with the location and description being in the right place, and that the desert was flooded 12,000 years ago. Most of the evidence found doesn't exactly hold up to scrutiny. Other locations that are believed to be Atlantis spread from Greece to Spain, with some even putting the location in South America or India. Regardless of the accepted belief, it's still fun to imagine that somewhere below the ocean lies an incredibly advanced civilization. Well to Hell. The Well to Hell is a legend about a borehole in Russia that drilled too deep and broke into hell. If you have ever played Dwarf Fortress, you know the horror of unleashing the circus. The story begins in the 1980s, where a man named Mr. Azikov led Soviet engineers to a location in Siberia and had them drill a hole that was 9 miles deep, where they broke through into a cavity. Unsure of what was below, they lowered a microphone and other sensory equipment down into the hole. The hole was about 1000 degrees Celsius, or roughly 1800 Fahrenheit, was filled with fire, and tormented screaming could be heard. This was the story that was published by a Finnish newspaper ran by a group of Pentecostal Christians. Someone researching the story found that this Finnish newspaper had actually taken it from a different Finnish Christian newspaper, who had in turn taken it from a Messianic Jewish newspaper. From here, American tabloids ran their own story, with sound effects appearing on the internet of the reported sounds. One specific network that continued perpetuating the story was the Trinity Broadcasting Network, an American Christian television network, who used the story to show others that there was proof of hell. One Norwegian teacher had even wrote to the network, giving them a false account of having seen a bat fly out from the hole, burning a trail of fire across the sky in its wake. He had made this up, even giving the network a mistranslation of a different news story, but the network ran with it and had done no verification into his claims. As for the origin of this story, there is a real borehole that the Soviet Union did work on, being the Kola Super Deep borehole. This hole is roughly 7.5 miles deep, and they did find some interesting anomalies, disproving some previously held beliefs. However, the only thing that was described as boiling was the drilling mud because of hydrogen gas, and the only thing screaming were microscopic plankton fossils. The screams found online were soundtracks and sound bites from various horror movies, with the 1972 movie Blood Baron being identified. There are a few other horror movies about this idea, so if you have any interest in them, I suggest 9 Miles Down or The Super Deep. Celebrity replacement. I will bring up a few of these celebrity replacement theories, but there is a winner here for most prolific. The biggest theory out there surrounds Avril Lavigne, who is said to have died after the release of her album Let Go, and was replaced by a body double. The original post started in a Brazilian blog, giving evidence of Lavigne being replaced. This blog later recanted the statement and apologized, while saying the blog is a way to prove how conspiracy theories spread. The story goes that a Melissa Vandella was hired on as a body double, specifically for public events and paparazzi, to keep them away from Lavigne. However, the pressure of fame and a death in the family caused her to end her life, and Melissa was brought on as a replacement full-time. Some evidence includes skin blemishes, subliminal messages in her songs, and the name Melissa being written on her hand in a photo shoot. Avril Lavigne has gone on record multiple times saying that the theory is silly, people are bored and spreading rumors, and that she is the real her. Several other theories include Paul McCartney of the Beatles, Melania Trump, and more recently, Kanye West. Most of these stories revolve around a tragic thing happening, or the person doing something that shadowy figures dislike, so they were replaced. Paul McCartney supposedly died in a car wreck, but was such an icon that they replaced him to not cause mass hysteria. Melania Trump supposedly left Donald Trump, but was replaced as to make things look okay publicly. And Kanye West was supposedly too out of control, so his handlers had to find a replacement and lock him away. There are many theories about many celebrities floating around, and I'm sure you can find one about your favorite celebrity too. Level 3. Bleeding Stone. The Bleeding Stone myth has a few different stories under the same moniker, so I'll list a couple here. One story begins in the Greek city of Thessaloniki, where 7,000 to 18,000 people were brutally slaughtered by the order of the Byzantine Emperor Theodosius. The surviving people erected a stone to memorialize the victims, and it was believed to miraculously bleed once a year on the day of the massacre. The emperor ordered the stone to be destroyed in an attempt to erase the history of the massacre. In doing so, a curse was considered active until 1978, where any building whose tenants failed to acknowledge the history of the site was violently destroyed. In 1978, a residential building collapsed due to an earthquake and took the lives of 29 people. The new building that was erected in its place was an archive of the history of the city, including detailed references to the original massacre. In doing so, it is believed that they have calmed the spirits who believe they have been acknowledged. A different myth centers around a type of gemstone known as a bloodstone. The bloodstone, martyr stone, or its geological name heliotrope, was believed to have been created when drops of Christ's blood had stained jasper at the foot of the cross. Even before then, however, it was used by many for its magical powers. Some ancient cultures used it in divination, others for strength. Pliny the Elder mentioned that some magicians used it to become invisible. The most interesting is the belief that it has healing powers, which almost all cultures believed. India specifically had a ritual of dipping the stone in cold water and placing it upon injuries, which has actual scientific basis in the fact that the stone contains iron oxide, which can be used as an astringent. Hoosac Tunnel. The Hoosac Tunnel is a tunnel built in Massachusetts that connects the north part of the state to the south and west. The tunnel itself has a rather cursed history, often being referred to as the Bloody Pit. Folklore says that Hoosac means forbidden in the language of the Mohawk tribe, but it more closely means stony place. The tunnel was the longest of its kind in the world at the time, and took many lives and much tragedy to become a landmark. It cost an estimated 200 lives to build, and is considered to be one of the most haunted places in all of New England. To set the scene, northern Massachusetts was disconnected from the rest of the state and America due to a mountain range. Because of this, a man named Avila Crocker took it upon himself to construct the railroad. This would help connect the topmost part of the state with the rest and give easier access to materials and trade. If he could manage to do this, it would make him a lot of money. They chose the thinnest spot in the Hoosac Range and connected it all the way to New York. The workers would start on opposite sides and meet up in the middle eventually, and in 1851 they started this big dig. In 1852, a new boring machine was supposed to begin work on the eastern tunnel, but it got stuck in the bedrock and could not be recovered. This, along with other setbacks, eventually bankrupted Crocker, and while a few attempts would be made, work would not begin in earnest until 10 years later. This new effort was done in a slightly more modern way, with survey towers and reinforced brick to support and make sure it went smoothly. The creation of this tunnel also happened around the advent of nitroglycerin, a very fussy explosive that could blow up if you looked at it wrong. They set up a factory to produce it nearby to help keep a steady supply to the project. Because of how new it was, there was no regulation surrounding the use of it, and the foreman of the nitroglycerin factory erupted in 800 pounds of the stuff, and not a trace of his body was found. A separate explosive expert, Ringo Kelly, had also prematurely set off a blast that crushed his two companions. During this time, there were reports of the two men walking around the tunnel as ghostly apparitions. Kelly was found a year later, strangled in the same spot his friends were crushed. Soon, a ventilation hole was necessary for the now 5-mile-long tunnel, and this would be the worst of the catastrophes. 13 men were working in this hole when a lamp ignited, sending an above structure raining down onto the men. The men inside were either drowned, pummeled by debris, or suffocated by the fumes. This event also caused reports of apparitions groaning and crying out. It was later found that the men in the hole had created a raft to wait out a rescue that never came. And shortly after the discovery of the raft, the ghost had reportedly vanished. Eventually, the vent was finished and the tunnel had connected, but there are many accounts of workers seeing ghosts, and people to this day come to visit the haunted tunnel. Big-Nosed George. Big-Nosed George was a highway robber in Wyoming. Following the events of a failed train robbery, police had tracked down and attempted to bring him to justice. The police had walked straight into an ambush and were both killed by George and his crew. This caused police to become outraged, offering a $10,000 bounty, which quickly doubled to $20,000 for the apprehension of the murderers. George would disappear for a few months, only to reappear at the site of a military convoy trekking across Milestown. They waited until the soldiers were spread out, then surprised and captured a wagon, an ambulance, as well as officers and the merchant stationed with the convoy to collect army payroll. After this robbery, they were found in the same town, drunk and boasting about their crimes. George was taken back to Wyoming to face trial. During his imprisonment, he had attempted to break out, filing down his cuffs and beating the guard before the guard's wife forced him back into his cell at gunpoint. News had spread of this escape attempt, and soon masked men burst into the prison, holding the jailer at gunpoint before releasing George into the angry mob outside. They had been waiting to finish him off once and for all, stringing him up from a telegraph pole. This happened to be around the time where science began in earnest, and two doctors, Thomas McGee and John Osborne, took George's body as a medical cadaver, intent on studying his brain for insight into his criminality. His skull cap was sawn off and presented to the 16-year-old medical assistant, Lillian Heath. She would be the first female doctor of Wyoming and had used his skull as an ashtray, pen holder, and doorstop. They had taken a death mask of his face and skinned his thighs and chest, which were later made into a pair of shoes and medical bag. Osborne later wore these shoes to his inaugural ball after his election as the first Democratic governor in Wyoming. The rest of his body was stored in a whiskey barrel in a salt solution before being buried behind McGee's office. All of this was forgotten about until 70 years later, when construction workers found the whiskey barrel with bones in the shoes in 1950. Lillian Heath was contacted, and the skull cap she'd acquired was found to fit perfectly on the skull. Some of his remains are on display at the Carbon County Museum, including the shoes, skull, and death mask. Level 4. Mercritis. Mercritis is a Mississippi legend of beautiful women being driven insane by a disease, which caused them to become homicidal. Men are mostly immune, instead becoming host for this odor that transmits the disease to the women. The main belief as to the cause of this condition was consumption of a lot of lead paint, and the low survival rate from eating the paint is the reason why this has such a small chance of spread. The theory states that upon being a transmitter, your body secretes a liquid with an odor that has an effect on women. Most women only become irritable or hostile, but the more beautiful the woman, the closer they are to tipping over the edge. The thought behind this is that these beautiful women have a certain hormonal composition that causes this to flourish within them. There are a few reports of this happening, but most are word of mouth. One account happened in Europe, where a man was chased by a dozen women in a town by the sea. He jumped into the ocean, hoping to escape them, but the women jumped in as well, and all involved drowned. Somehow, it made its way to Mississippi, where some women hunted the town looking to vacate the area. A conspiracy arose as to the lack of documentation, saying that the medical community covered it up because there was no cure. As for the truth of the matter, lead poisoning is known to cause behavioral changes, causing antisocial and violent behavior. Most symptoms in adults are relatively mild, but during the development of a child, lead can cause heavy effects on the brain and behavior. Jacques St. Germain. Jacques St. Germain is a New Orleans legend of a man from France who had moved to New Orleans in 1902. He is said he was a descendant of St. Germain, a jack-of-all-trades noble with many interests and titles. Jacques would entertain the aristocracy in New Orleans with dinner parties, but never ate himself. He seemingly had first-hand knowledge of events that happened hundreds of years prior, and was quite the charmer and extremely witty. One night, he invited a woman up to his balcony, where he bit her neck, causing her to leap from the second story and call for help. Onlookers rushed to her side, seeing the bite marks, but the man was nowhere to be found. When his house was searched, they found blood-stained clothes from different time periods, and wine bottles filled with human blood. They found no food or utensils in his house. The woman later succumbed to the bite in the hospital. The legend states that he himself was not a descendant, but the Saint Germain, and that some people occasionally spot him throughout the world. Antillia. Antillia was a phantom island in the Atlantic Ocean, west of Portugal and Spain. Phantom islands are islands found to not exist upon attempted travels. According to Iberian legend, as the Muslims began to conquer Spain, 7 Christian Visigoth bishops took their followers into the Atlantic Ocean to evade the new rulers. In doing so, they found an island and made 7 settlements, one for each bishop. It made its first appearance in 1424 and remained until 1492, where the Atlantic Ocean had been more accurately mapped. Some theories exist that the large landmass that is Antillia is actually supposed to be a representation of America. Tales of utopian islands have existed for a long time, with Homer singing the Fortunate Islands, and to retread content, Atlantis as well. Some of these islands actually did exist, such as the Canary Islands, which throws doubt into what these named places could have been. However, as the Middle Ages was a very Christian-friendly time in Europe, old stories took on new life. Many of the old tales were rebranded into Christian utopias. One issue that comes across is that seafaring people tend to commingle with other cultures, creating a mishmash of different legends that may contain similarities with a different culture. Several variations of the legend exist, but the Portuguese are believed to be the first source. According to them, a Portuguese boat had found the island, and the people there spoke the same language. Upon speaking to these inhabitants, they said that they fled to the island during the time of Roderick, and asked if the Moors are still in control of Spain. Upon further attempts to reach the island, it was seen along the water, only to disappear as the voyagers got close. This legend also seemed to bring about a separate legend known as the 7 Cities of Gold, somewhere in South America. And with that, this video comes to a close. Let me know if you have any other preferred topics, and if I got anything wrong around my facts. I do not currently have any other planned topics at the moment, but expect the next video in a few weeks, not months. Have a nice day, and I hope you all enjoyed.